Welcome, friend, to Life and Liberty Radio. I'm David Householder, here to encourage your pursuit of happiness. You and I are partners, exploring our shared spiritual journeys. Together, we're dreaming and working for a free society. Tell others today about our adventure in faith and freedom. So breathe in, open your mind, lift up your spirit. Let's get started. Talking here with Don Everts, and he's the author of Go and Do, Becoming a Missional Christian, which is a new book by InterVarsity. It's just out, and we're up here in Edmonton, Alberta at Break Forth. And I've just got a few questions for him. First of all, Don, what brought you to write this book? Books don't just happen because you feel like writing a book. Something happens that gets you thinking about it, much like the letters in the Bible that Paul wrote. He didn't just say, I'm going to write Galatians today. I hope people like it. He was responding to something. So I'm going to just let you go ahead and talk about that.
Well, there are basically two things, Dave, that led to the writing of this book. One was just the story of how God, over the years, patiently has been helping me get caught up in His work in the world. I wanted nothing more before I became a Christian than to live alone in a cabin in the woods somewhere. And even when I became a Christian, I wanted to do that. And so part of what led me to write the book is this joyful transformation and change as He has been getting me more and more every year caught up in His work in the world, whether that's overseas, just loving people in my own family, doing evangelism. So that was one thing, just the joy and frankly, just amazement that He could do something with a big introvert like me. And then the other is I'm a minister of outreach at my church, a nearly 200-year-old Presbyterian church. And part of my role there is helping people get caught up in God's work in the world. And we have partnerships in the city, and we have work overseas. We run the Alpha program, so we do a lot with relational evangelism. And so just helping people slowly get equipped and inspired to get involved with what God's doing in the world. So kind of my joyful adventure, and then just sort of practically trying to help suburban folks get caught up in God's work in the world. It's kind of that work that led to, okay, well, what does it mean to get caught up in His work? What does it mean to be a quote-unquote missional Christian? And it was that curiosity and that work that led me to work on the book.
Well, this is fascinating because I've been interviewing a lot of people here at Breakforth, and it seems like most of the major leaders here are introverts. And most people think that if I'm an introvert, I can't be an outreach person. You're an outreach pastor at Bonham Presbyterian in St. Louis, and you wouldn't think that an introvert would sign up to be an outreach pastor, but it seems like most of the people I interview here who have some of these bigger ideas and actually do these things tend to be introverts. Would you speak to those introverts who have been told by perhaps the enemy that they shouldn't be doing ministry because they're introverts and they need to be extroverts for that?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing is recognizing God has made us is who we are, and that's an okay thing. To be honest with you, it wasn't until I'd written my third book that I didn't feel guilty about writing books, because it's a solitary act of ministry, and so I vaguely felt like I was being guilty for doing that, because everything has to be relational and out there and gregarious. So the other thing I would say, particularly when it comes to evangelism and equipping people for evangelism, something that people have reflected back to me is because God has made me lead into my weakness, if you will, and He is strong in my weakness, that there's a way that's really empowering for them. They say, Don, if you were this gregarious extrovert that just, you could tell these evangelism stories and I'd feel good for you, but I wouldn't necessarily feel like, well, I can do that. So I don't know, Dave. I think in my life I've found that God has been able to, He's strong in my weakness, and because of that He can use me to equip others, because I'm, it's sort of like, well, if Don can do it, then certainly they can as well. So the other thing I've found in my own life is the great value and dignity that people have. And there's nothing like being in the kingdom of God to convince you of the beauty of relating with people, even if that's uncomfortable.
Now, you got started with a lot of your writing, and you've written more books than anybody I know your age. I mean, it's just amazing how many books you've written. And you got going with that in Boulder, Colorado. Tell me what kind of life you were living at the time that got that happening.
Yeah, I just moved to Boulder, Colorado. My wife and I, we were newly married, and we were going there to start a campus ministry with InterVarsity on the CU Boulder campus. Well, but there aren't a lot of students there in the summer. So our first summer there, I spent a lot of time playing pickup basketball. It was one of my favorite things to do. And I found myself getting in a lot of conversations with non-Christians. And these were, most of my campus ministry prior to that, Dave, had been working with nominal Christians in terms of owning their faith, growing up in their faith, discipling them. And this was really my first time to be just surrounded by just straight up normal people. Very little experience with Jesus or the church. Boulder has a huge subculture, and I was playing basketball with them, and so I began wrestling with how, because people would ask me, "What do you do?" and I began wrestling with, how do I talk about what I do? How do I talk about Jesus? How do I talk about prayer in ways that don't sound totally, absolutely idiotic? And and I think by journaling, and so I journaled a lot. I'd play basketball and then sit in the park and just journal about the dumb ways I talked about Jesus, and how could I talk about him? How do I strip away the cliche, stereotype language to be able to communicate him to people where they can really hear it and not trigger these words they have allergies to? And so it was that attempt at kind of how do I talk with people that led to my first book, which was Jesus with Dirty Feet.
Yeah, it's just been amazing how many books you've written over this time. So obviously, you get a lot of energy out of that. It wouldn't be one of those things that this isn't a drag for you to have to write. This is one of those, you're very prolific is a good word for it. You write a lot of books, and you really have never had an unpublished thought. I mean, you just continue to write stuff. And yet you still have a real youthful way of looking at everything. And I think you're probably going to have that well into your 60s and 70s. Now, what kind of things have you seen change in the culture since you first started writing? Because the last 6 months, last year, there's a lot of things. I was in youth ministry, and it used to be every 3 years we had to change everything. Now it's like every year and a half. And so there's an acceleration of cultural change.
Yeah. Things have been changing a lot. One of the things I would say that I've seen change is, a couple of things. One is kind of format of books. So you say I'm prolific, but one of my tricks is I write really short books. But part of that for me, early on, I want to read gulpable books that you can just swallow. And so I wrote gulpable books, and I've seen that take on a little more. There's a little more of that out there. We're fast moving, and let me get to the stuff. Let me get right to it. The other thing I've found is the kind of insistence on, I could say existential reality, but let's just say, does stuff really work in life? Part of doing ministry in a postmodern context is we don't have the leisure to sit around and theorize and speculate without it connecting to life. And so I've seen, a lot of books these days are like what you say, they are occasional. They come out of an occasion. And so you see a lot more practitioners, I think, writing books. You see books that don't just have anecdotes, but real narrative from life, real dirty, tension-filled, real narrative. And I welcome that, and it is challenging because you can't just be clever. It's not good enough to be clever. It has to connect with real life and with how to do ministry these days. And so it is fast-paced. I think I'm glad that I've been a practitioner first and a teacher and a writer second. I think that keeps the juices flowing, keeps me honest, and that's really helped.
Would you like to see people's faith come alive in your church? Wouldn't it be good to see new people make friends and see people learn as they grow in the content of our faith? If so, check out the Blackberry Bush course for your congregation, blackberrybush.org. Bring your church on a spiritual treasure hunt. You've connected with an older established church, almost 200 years old. I've been to the church with you. I've watched you teach. You're a very gifted, upfront teacher. I just really admire the fact that you, much like Nicky Gumbel and some others, really stay grounded in church, because I think church is the hope of the world. And there's a lot of people, I've had youth pastors and stuff say, we got to get rid of church, we got to just be church and all that. Talk a little bit about the bride of Christ and why the church is still really important.
Yeah, great. And I'm like you, I worked with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. I love the parachurch. I believe in the parachurch. But the church, this was God's idea. And to have a localized body, the accountability, the rootedness of the church, and really it's a non-negotiable. So one of the things that I've found, one of the beauties that I have found being at Bonham, Bonham is fully multi-generational. And we have kids born all the time. A couple months ago, I was greeting people after a service, and I happened to be preaching at the traditional service that week, and I greeted first-time visitors. One of the first-time visitors was a young family with a 2-week-old child, and the other first-time visitor was a 105-year-old woman. And so multiple generations. And I tell you what that does to me, like as a teacher, how do you preach? When I'm preaching a text, it forces me to ask the question, how is this good news for a 5-year-old? Because we have 5-year-olds and up stay in for the sermon. And how is this good news for an 85-year-old? And that forces me to mine the full depth of what is in the Scripture. I see real advantages to focused ministries, but in ways that can become a ghetto. You know, I mean, for 20 years, I only hung out. I mean, if you were 23, you were too old for me to hang out with. And it has forced me to, I think, realize the more robust, fully orbed implications of the Gospels. And I think that's part of the intention of the local church, that we are generations together, we are the body together. Paul's language, it's the church is a body, there's different ears, different parts of the body. And the local church is where those parts come together. And it's a great discipline. The other thing about the church is these are people you're with all the time, and they know you. And, it's one thing for us to be up here in Edmonton, as you know. I can come and speak to my seminar, and they don't know me. They don't know if I'm living out anything I'm talking about. But I tell you what, people at Bonham do. And there's something healthy about that. There's something rooted about the local church. And God calling me to Bonham was a huge gift to me.
I think it's really true. Nicky Gumbel always said that he was much more popular the farther away he was from his local church, because the local church, they know him, as who he is. Yeah, we have a lot of listeners who aren't church people and wouldn't necessarily call themselves capital C Christians, and perhaps he's driving home in the car, perhaps she's listening on a podcast or whatever. What would you say to them, just if you had 30 seconds in an elevator, about really looking into the Christian faith and the Christian lifestyle?
One thing I would say is it is possible. A lot of us do have church hurt. We've been hurt by churches, and so we want to I'm just going to go it alone. I'll read some of the Bible. I'll read some of the teachings. And so I absolutely understand those impulses. I think what I would say from my own experience, and this is as an introvert who would rather be alone, and as a student of the Bible, we're not intended to live that way. We are intended to live in community. We make the most sense. We are the most sane. We are the most healthy when we are living in community. And so what I would encourage someone to do is to take steps into that. You don't have to go all in, but to take steps back into community, even if that's just attending a church, even if that's just join a small group. And I think you may find that it's somewhat addicting.
Oh, that's great, Don. And just one last thing. How can people get a hold of your work? We're talking with Don Everts. He's the pastor at Bonham Presbyterian Church, outreach pastor there, and he's also the author of Go and Do, Becoming a Missional Christian, which is just out here in 2012. How do people engage your work, find your work? Do you have somewhere online people can go and all of those kind of things?
Sure. Well, two places I would say. All my books are with InterVarsity Press, and so if people go to ivpress.com, they can find out more about the different books that I have. And then our church's website, which is bonpres.org, is where all my teaching is cached, and videos and sermons and that sort of thing. And they can see some of the outreach work that I'm doing there.
Excellent. We're talking with Don Everts. He is the outreach pastor at Bonham Presbyterian and author of Go and Do, Becoming a Missional Christian. Thanks so much for this conversation.
Great. Thanks for being with you, Dave.
Well, that's all for today on Life and Liberty Radio. Thanks so much for sharing this part of your spiritual journey with me. Now, the views on this program are not necessarily those of my advertisers, sponsors, places I work, or do business with. They're purely my own, but I'm sharing them with you, so share your ideas with me. Write me on Twitter at Liberty House, LIBERTYHOUS, no E. Until next time, let's continue dreaming and working for a free and spiritually grounded society.